updates, viewers. You are joining us live at the Assembly Legislature building, where we honor the life and the contributions of our first Chief Secretary, Mr. Hochoy Charles. And certainly what a wonderful contribution he made and definitely left a mark here in Tobago. So for this part of our conversation, we are being joined by Mr. Ashworth Jack, who was a former minority leader in the Tobago House of Assembly and worked very closely with Mr. Charles. So we're going to get started off talking a little bit about Mr. Charles. And of course, we're going to also touch on Mr. Basdeo Pandey, our fifth Prime Minister, who we also lost on New Year's Day. But we're going to start off with Mr. Charles. So good morning and welcome to you, Mr. Jack. How are you doing?
Good morning, Kandace. Good morning, Tobago Update. Everyone viewing on the World Wide Web. Thanks for having me.
Now, as we look back at Mr. Charles, what stood out to you? I'm just going. I mean, I know you work very closely with the man, but what stood out, you know, looking back at him?
Let me just say something about his death, and then we go to,
sure, no problem.
To the life of the man. You know, there's an old African adage that says, when an old man dies, a library is burnt. This epitomizes the death of Mr. Charles. Walking encyclopedia, walking library, you know. At that time, in the African tradition, especially to the Igbo tribe of Nigeria, what they did is that they chose people to carry the history. We're lucky that we still have written history. But Mr. Charles was one of those persons who could rattle off the history, rattle off the law, and stuff like that, you know. And I think that this for Tobago and for the country at large is a major loss. But it's something that we have to understand that and I say this all the time, we owe God a debt.
Yeah.
Once we are born, we know we will die. To me, what is important is how you live between birth and death. And that is what is important. Mr. Charles' life, the fact that we are here eulogizing him, speaks to the kind of contribution that he would have made during that time. You know, and Mr. Charles is one of those line of strong Tobagonians of the era that showed caution to the wind as it relates to fighting for Tobago's autonomy. And to that end, I found it very interesting that Mr. Charles died exactly 134 years after Tobago lost its autonomy. Tobago lost its autonomy on the 1st of January 1889. And Hochoy died on the 31st of December 2023, exactly 134 years. And the fact that he spent his life in the struggle for Tobago's autonomy, I think there are two significant dates that will go down in the annals of history.
Certainly. And as you look back, what stood out?
What stood out with Hochoy? His dogmaticness, the fact that he was fearless, the fact that he was not only fearless, but he knew his stuff. You know, there are some fearless people who are bravado. They just make noise. No. Mr. Charles, when he made noise, he knew what he was talking about. You know, there are so many contributions that Mr. Charles would have made to Tobago's development. You know, I think I heard Pam allude to a couple of them, so I wouldn't want to go back over those.
Certainly.
But just to say this, to add to this, when the issue of the scholarship program in Tobago came up, and of course we knew that there was a lot of opposition from Trinidad. Immediately after that, when Trinidad saw the benefit of the scholarship program, Mr. Pandey introduced dollar for dollar. So the first person who introduced those scholarship programs to Trinidad and Tobago was Hochoy Charles. And after they fought him for a while, they realized, hey, there's benefit to this. And that is how dollar for dollar came about. And of course, subsequent to that, Mr. Manning came in and did the gate. But the opener of the gate was Hochoy. You know, and I think that was a significant contribution. Of course, you know, Hochoy was also responsible for where we are in terms of a predictable share of the national budget. When we came into the Assembly in 96, I came in, of course, Hochoy was there about 80, went out, became a minister, a senator and a minister, then came back in. But when we came in, the Tobago share of the budget was between 1.6% and 2%. And that is how the issue, Mr. Robbins, in his wisdom, wrote into the Act, the Dispute Resolution Commission, the choice of that. And of course, within months, Hochoy triggered the Dispute Resolution Commission. And of course, it did not come to fruition until the year 2000. And he never really got, as Chief Secretary, to enjoy the use of that, because the first time Tobago got the 4.03% would have been in 2001, when he lost the election. I was part of that team on the 28th of January 2001. And of course, later the year, we got the first tranche from the Dispute Resolution Commission's fight.
Yes.
You know, and but even so, with a very, very limited amount of resources that Mr. Charles had, there were a number of development programs that started simultaneously throughout the island. I was at work, so I could attest to a number of them. You know, the program that started to do all the road developments at Providence Road, in Palatevere, in Speyside, the Plymouth Road, Easterfield Road, between going back to the dam to go to Mount St. George and Mason. In that period, with very, very little resources, because I remember in that year there was about $34 million in development funds. 34 million, TT, in development funds. And it was about $100-something million at that time in recurrent. But he would have changed the dynamics vis-a-vis how much recurrent to development. And he cited all those. And that was the fearless nature of the human being. And at the same time that was happening, there were a number of other programs that were put in place. For example, you know, there's a caregiver program for where people take care of the elderly. All that was done during the time of Mr. Charles. You know? So there were a number of things that Hochoy did that was revolutionary in terms of how we did stuff in the past. And it is unfortunate that I'm trying to remember which was a poem that spoke about somebody who was untimely ripped from their mother's womb. And to me, that was Hochoy. He was before his time. Yeah. You know, people didn't understand it. But I remember he always told a story about his name. He always told a story about his name. And he said when his mother was pregnant with him, he was told this by his mom. She used to be hot, you know, heat. And there was one person who said, you're hot, a business person in Scarborough. And he saw her fanning and sweating and consuming a lot of water. And then she said, the gentleman said to him, oh my God, Hochoy, Hochoy. And she didn't know Hochoy in one of the Chinese towns meant fire. And so the mother named him Hochoy. And sometimes your name means a lot, you know. And his life has been epitomized by a very vocal, very fiercely Tobagonian gentleman. You know, I have been privy to some of the fights in my time.
We have certainly know about some of those fights.
Some of those fights. I remember the battle with Mr. Pandy when they just wanted to come and pave roads in Tobago.
With Mr. Carlos
John. I mean, I nearly went to jail for that. Yeah.
Oh, we had a little bit about that yesterday from Mr. Jerry McFarlane.
I nearly went to jail for that because at the time I was in charge of works. And I took a number of pieces of works equipment, trucks and graders, and we went and blocked the road. And I remember a police superintendent, I don't wish to call his name, I mean, we became friends after. A police superintendent came and told me, I'm going to lock you up. I said, go ahead. He said, you're blocking the government road. I said, the government is ours. I said, I'm in charge of works. I said, when you would want to fix, who you just call? Works. I said, well, work fixing, works road. And the thing about that is that Hochoy was the kind of person that initially I tried to get him to tell him that I was going to do that. But I knew him so well that I noted that if I had to take a beating, I would take it.
So did he take a beating for that?
Of course not. When he did call me back, I was on the road blocking it. And he said, Mr. Jack, I hear you're blocking the road. I said, Chief, what do you want to do here? Block the road. And so things I do, you know, we had some of those moments. Of course, we have had our differences, and that comes from strong personalities. You know, but there are some things that I remember very fondly of him. As I told this story sometime earlier today, I remember when I just came to Works. I was young, very, very young, just turned 30. So I went to Works, and there were some strong-willed men running Works at the time, you know. And they were taking the Works equipment, doing private jobs, you can't find them. And so this little fellow come down to Works and instructing them to bring back the equipment and stuff like that. And so they're fighting, they're vexed. And they complained to Mr. Charles about me. And on Saturday morning, his office was right across there. He called me up to his office Saturday morning about 8 o'clock. So I said, what this man want, guy? So he came up to his office. Mr. Jack. I said, what happened? He said, I am told that you are giving trouble in Works. I said, Chief, like what? So we talk. And this is very early. That's probably within the first month of of us being in office. And then he told me, and I said, but Chief, we're trying to find the equipment. So I'm trying to understand, what was I been chastised for? And then he said to me, he said, I want to tell you something. So I'm waiting for my beating, right? Because I tell myself, you're probably young and brash, so you're about to get a beating. And he said to me, don't ever forget this. So what's that? He said, your subordinates can never give you trouble. Only your superior. Go and do your work. So things I do is I remember that, and it's something I have lived with. It's something even where I am now, I pass on to people. Your subordinates can't give you trouble. It's only your superiors could give you trouble, you know. And I learned that from him, and I have lived with that ever since, you know. And he was like that, you know. There's another one that I use all the time that I remember from him. Experience keep it a very expensive school, and fools learn in no other. And there are things I just see you say, because he was an avid reader. He's an avid reader. And
is that what inspired you to be a reader? Because, I mean, someone
that was me before. That was me. I have a sister immediately after me. And it's something I'm getting back into heavily. And they will tell you, I used to sit down and read and don't even know when the sun come up. I read whole night, and then when you look out, you say, wait a minute, the place getting bright. You know. But people like Hochoy, Ian Robinson, and Jeff Davidson, those were three of the people who inspired me greatly. They were fearless men. Jeff was quiet, but Jeff was a dangerous human being. I don't think nobody really knew and understand Jeff well unless he was close to him. You know, and unfortunately, Jeff and Hochoy passed in the same year. And they were two of the last bastions of Tobago's protection, and in terms of knowledge, they were two of the people who are extremely knowledgeable about things Tobago, the struggle for internal self-government. They lived it, you know. I want to be careful that this is not seen wrongly, but I want to say maybe it is fortuitous that from a very, very early age, I kept company with people like Jeff and Hochoy and Stanley Beard and Murphy John and Ken Jones. And because as a result of that, I lived some of the things that people hear about. But I lived it. I was part of it. I saw it unfold. You know, I remember there were some things that I remember clearly about Hochoy. Never late.
Never late.
Hochoy was never late. And don't care what it is, Hochoy was never, ever late. And he had hard late. And that was another, that was a Robinson trait. Robinson was never late. I remember sometimes we have meetings and if you see Robinson watching about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, he says, lock that door. And when the door locked, that is it. Anybody who late stay outside. You know? And so things like those, you know, would have instilled a certain kind of thing. And I think some of our leaders need to have some of those instilled in them because they're very. It's new to some people, and sometimes it's uncourteous to have people waiting and stuff like that, and people judge you because there's another thing that I've learned from that era of politicians, that punctuality is the first sign of efficiency. And you know, so those are the kind of things, you know. And I've seen Hochoy, you know, and I remember some of the lighter stuff about him, and I remember in campaigning, he was a fierce campaigner, you know. And I remember in '92, the now Secretary for Housing, Ian, myself, and Hochoy used to go on campaign whole day until night. I was reminded Ian about this, you know. And our meal for the day will be a pack of cricks. And them time they sell cheese by the ounce. So you have about 2 ounces of cheese. And you drank water by every standpipe. Those days, you didn't look for money for campaigning and stuff like that. And that was in '92. That was the first time I was nominated to run for the assembly. But of course, my politics started in '77 as a little guy. But in that year, we were particularly close because I was supposed to be a candidate for the area, and there was some friction. And I stood down and allowed Hochoy to run for the seat and became his campaign manager. And of course, Ian and I were always very close. And so we went out to campaign. And that was it every day, you know. And
how do you think he should be remembered?
It is hard. It is hard to say how you remember people like Hochoy. But maybe to start with, and as I said this in another place this morning, I don't want to be like at the risk of sounding facetious. I think one of the first things, one that could be done, is that bypass road that is being constructed now from Cove
Friendship
to should be named the Hochoy Charles bypass. And that is one of the things that, you remember, he always wanted that place, he wanted the airport terminal to be in that area.
Yes, in the Friendship Estate.
Right.
So he spoke about it quite a lot.
Yeah, because it was one of the options. And in looking at it, we thought that if you look at Miami Airport, where the planes come into the tarmac, compared to where you jump on a train and end up to go to the terminal to do your immigration, it's probably 10 times and that. So there was no need to do all the breaking down of all the houses in that compound area when that was another option, you know. And I know Hochoy felt very, very strongly about that, you know. So I think that might be a start, you know. I wouldn't want it to take as long as it took to honor Ian Robinson. You know, that was another struggle, and maybe I put my foot in my mouth. But saying this reminds me of what I had to go through to get the airport named Ian Robinson International, because that was my doing. And I think there are a couple of people that we have to honor, and Hochoy is one of them. Jeff is another one. Has a quiet disposition, but his contribution cannot be forgotten. And then I also find it difficult to think that in a country made up of 2 islands, there is no position on the island of Tobago, in government or otherwise, that allows anyone in Tobago to automatically have a state funeral. Something is wrong with that. Well, every chief secretary in Tobago, at least to begin with, should be entitled to a state funeral. Everyone. I mean, and Hochoy, who have done so much. That should not have even been a question. Of course, if they were asked and his family said no, then there's another story altogether. But as of right, he should have been entitled to a state funeral. And
then speaking of state funeral, one is being planned right now for the passing of our fifth Prime Minister, Mr. Basti.
And rightfully so.
And we have to spend a few minutes. We only got a couple of minutes left, but I mean, you also would have had some interactions with Mr. Pandey. What can you tell us about that time?
Witty. Witty. It's interesting. I ask people, do you know where the NER started? You know the NER started in Tobago, right? At the Alma Guest House in Mason Hall. Carl Hudson Phillips, Basdio Pandey, A.N.R. Robinson. Also there was Hochoy. I remember there was this woman who provided the food. She was an assemblywoman after Pearl. Sister Pearl, we used to call her from, imagine that, I forget the name. And she was the assemblywoman for Hope, Mount St. George. Again, a little guy, 1985, 86, I was there. And so that is where it started. And I seen Baz there, and Baz was witty. And of course, we have had a number of opportunities to interact. And I remember one time after the 2010 election, we met, I think there was something at the stadium, and it was there, and of course, he knew that I supported, I was close to Kamala because Kamala was somebody I knew since the 86 election, through Mr. Robinson. And he came across to me and he said, Ashworth. I don't know him. He said, I see you and all my enemies are friends. and that's the way he was, He was that kind of person, And so I think that the country have lost one day apart, one on the last day of the year and one on the first day of the year. 2 giants of men, 2 men who have shown a level of fearlessness, 2 men who were fierce for what they believed. Because, of course, as I said, after there was the scholarship program in Tobago, Pandey introduced the dollar for dollar. And then Pandey, again, a next man who have done a whole lot and have not probably been honored in the way he should have been, But I think that we forget our leaders too quickly. We move on from our leaders too quickly. And what we focus on is our differences and not our similarities. And that is why I say to people all the time, I do not believe in the politics of demonization. And that is what we do. Once we are not on the same side, they demonize you. And you're going to see all kinds of things in the next couple of years. I've started seeing some things. These self-righteous people are going to be putting out stuff about who Hochoy wasn't friends with and who he was friends with and who they agree with. And my maxim in life is, show me a perfect man and I'll show you a God. So I've seen, regardless of what send-off Hochoy have or gets tomorrow, the contribution that Hochoy has made to Tobago is going to go down in the annals of history. People are going to read about Hochoy for quite a while. Hochoy is going to have become more accepted, and that is what I find sometimes disturbing. People who were cursing Hochoy every day when he was alive, now singing him praises. I mean, it's just like, where? How? Make it make sense, But, you just have to leave it alone. I remember some of the things I remember is that even after I was out of the assembly, some of the assembly secretariat members, when the new assembly people came in, they met me one evening, it was after our budget, about 10 o'clock in the night, and they said to me, "You and Hochoy never really entered the assembly again, eh?" So he said, "You know, budget debate done." We used to debate the budget. Maybe it was wickedness, but but it was important for us. Our budget debate used to start 10 o'clock on the Thursday morning and finish the next morning 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. Whole day, whole night. I will never forget. Before they changed the date of the time, they had just changed the time for the budget. Just changed it. The first year, they changed, because it used to be January, and they then bring it to September. So, no, it was still there. So our budget had to go in September.
Yeah.
And the budget was in January. As I must probably have been one of the most unfortunate men. First year in the assembly, man. Budget debate, response on budget debate is on my birthday. So I gone in, I didn't know what it was going to be like. So I gone into the sitting, and all the guys telling me, "Well, happy birthday." I said, "Well, we go line later." I said, "Mm-hmm." When you make 12 o'clock, them boys look at me and say, "Jack, happy belated birthday." You know? And Hochoy would have taken us, and everybody had to be very precise. You had to go through your stuff. It was a good time. And one of the greatest honors I felt is that I was probably either the youngest or the second youngest member of the House that we came in. But the very second debate in the House, Hochoy did his, he outlined his plans, and then the next week he called me, "Mr. Jack." I said, "The next time we go to the House, the motion is yours. Bring a motion on the inter-island transportation between Trinidad and Tobago." And I was like, "This man crazy, man." It had all them fellows older than me, who I thought was more experienced than me, and you know, and I did, you know, I did, and it taught me how, from the responses and stuff, how erudite I was and stuff like that since then. And of course, after that, 16 years of talking would have done some good, if it would have done some good. But
Certainly.
I saw it as an honor that he would have chosen me to be the person who did one of those. And of course, you know, I have introduced Hochoy a million times. I've spoken right before him for years. We have debated in the House. We have worked together. As I said, you know, we have not been without our frictions. And anybody who knows me know that I will fight you. And anybody who know Hochoy is going to fight you. So there have been clashes, and but I've always been those kind of respectful, very respectful clashes. But
and you're definitely a man that has quite a lot of stories to tell, as we notice. But I mean, we're unfortunately out of time for this segment. I mean, for sure this morning actually. But I want to thank you so much, Mr. Jack, for being here with us and for speaking about Mr. Charles. And maybe this is something that we can build on as we go forward to make sure that we really remember the life, because I mean, we've barely touched on who Mr. Charles was and the work that he's done. We barely touched it.
Of his contribution and that dogmaticness. And,
it's quite a lot.
Yeah.
But I want to thank you so much, Mr. Jack. Certainly one of those people that would have worked very closely with Mr. Charles for many, many years. Just being here to share with us just a few things, minute little things about Mr. Charles. All right, so viewers, so that's it for our show this morning. I want to thank you so much for joining us. It was certainly my pleasure to get you closer to some of the people that had worked with Mr. Hochoy Charles, our first Chief Secretary, as we get ready to say goodbye to him, which would his funeral is supposed to take place tomorrow. So you want to stay tuned to us at Tobago Updates, as we will be bringing you coverage and so on. And we've got more later on this week as we honor the life of Mr. Charles. So bye for now.
up a strong